I never thought I'd find myself fighting my own homeowners association. But here I am, facing eviction from a place I thought was mine. It all started when the HOA suddenly showed up at my hunting lodge, claiming I was breaking some obscure rule. At first, I was confused. How could they even have the power to kick me out of a property I've cherished for years? Little did they know, this wasn't just any piece of land. What they didn't realize was that I actually own the entire forest surrounding that lodge. Yeah, you heard that right, the whole forest. From the outside, it looks like a simple cabin tucked away in the woods, perfect for hunting trips and quiet weekends. But behind the scenes, there's a lot more to this story. The HOA thinks they can control everything, set rules, and decide who stays and who goes. They started with small complaints, but it quickly escalated. Suddenly, I was being told to pack up and leave, like I was some trespasser on land that doesn't belong to me. The tension was building fast. I couldn't just sit back and accept this without a fight. The more I dug into the situation, the more I realized how tangled the whole thing was. There were hidden rules, unexpected loopholes, and a whole lot of power plays I never saw coming. But what they didn't count on was that I had something on my side, ownership that runs deeper than just a deed to a cabin. Now, the HOA is trying to force me out, but they haven't figured out the full extent of what they're up against. What happens when the hunters become the hunted? Stick around, because the story only gets wilder from here. I'm about to show them exactly who really owns this forest, and it's not who they think. For years, I've been coming to that hunting lodge to escape the noise of everyday life. It's more than just a cabin to me. It's a sanctuary, surrounded by towering pines, winding trails, and the kind of quiet you can't find anywhere else. When I first bought the property, it seemed like a small piece of land tucked inside a bigger community. And I never thought the HOA would be anything more than a distant name on some paperwork. But that all changed the day they showed up with eviction notices and a list of rules I supposedly broke. The HOA claims they have authority over the lodge and the surrounding area, enforcing strict guidelines about what can be built, how the land is used, even what kind of vehicles can be parked. It felt like they wanted to squeeze me out, but how? I dug through old documents and property maps and made some surprising discoveries. The lodge isn't just mine. I hold the deed to the entire forest that stretches for miles around it. The forest isn't just a pretty backdrop. It's legally under my name. That's when things got complicated. The HOA has their own maps and records, ones that suggest they control parts of the land too. There are conflicting claims, old agreements no one talks about, and plenty of gray areas that leave room for power struggles. They want to treat my lodge like it's part of their community. But from a legal standpoint, it's a completely different story. I realized I wasn't just fighting for a place to hunt and relax. I was standing up for my rights as a landowner against a system that's trying to bulldoze over me. The deeper I got, the more tangled the mess became, and I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. The HOA might think they can push me out, but I'm far from done. What they don't understand yet is just how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine. As the weeks went by, the conflict with the HOA only got more intense. They sent letters demanding I remove certain structures from the property, claiming they violated community rules. They insisted the lodge was in an unauthorized zone and that I needed approval for everything from the small deck I built to the dirt road leading up to the cabin. Every message felt like a power play, a way to chip away at my rights, bit by bit. But I knew their demands didn't add up, especially considering the land records I had. On top of that, some neighbors I'd never really talked to before started getting involved. A few were longtime HOA supporters, echoing the official line about community standards and protecting property values. Others seemed genuinely curious about the mess, quietly siding with me once they heard my side of the story. It was strange to see how divided the community was. Some people eager to see the HOA succeed, others quietly rooting for the underdog. That tension added another layer to the whole ordeal, turning what was supposed to be a peaceful hunting spot into a battlefield of opinions and alliances. Meanwhile, I started digging deeper into the HOA's history, uncovering old meeting minutes and legal filings that hinted at past disputes and even some questionable decisions. There were stories about previous landowners who fought back in mysterious clauses buried deep in the association's bylaws. The more I uncovered, the more it became clear that the HOA wasn't just trying to enforce rules, they were trying to control the whole area, maybe even expand their influence beyond what anyone expected. Through it all, I kept returning to my original question. How does someone like me, just a regular person who loves the woods, stand up to an organization like this? The stakes kept rising, and the lines between neighbor and adversary blurred. The HOA was closing in, but I wasn't backing down. What would happen next? The fight was far from over, and the real battle for the forest was just beginning. The pressure from the HOA kept mounting, and every day felt like walking on a tightrope. They scheduled meetings where they openly discussed plans to cut off access to the lodge, talking about fences and gates that would isolate me from the very roads I'd used for years. I started getting calls from contractors hired by the HOA, warning me about fines if I didn't comply with their demands immediately. The tone was clear. They wanted me out, no matter what it took. At the same time, the neighbors' attitudes began to shift. Some who had stayed quiet before started whispering about the drama unfolding, and a few even reached out to me with warnings, advice to be careful, to watch my back. There were rumors that the HOA might be willing to push legal battles so far it could get ugly. It wasn't just about property lines anymore. It felt personal. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. One evening, I found an official notice slipped under my door. It was a final warning, a deadline to vacate the lodge or face eviction proceedings. My heart sank. I knew this was no longer just a game of documents and rules. This was a direct challenge, a full-on attempt to take away everything I'd built and protected. But I also knew I had evidence my deed to the forest. Proof that the land was mine in ways the HOA hadn't counted on. That night, as I sat alone in the lodge surrounded by the quiet woods, I realized how much was at stake. This fight wasn't just for the cabin or the forest. It was about standing up to a system that tried to bully people out of their homes. I could feel the weight of what was coming. The HOA was ready to make their move, but so was I. The lines were drawn, and the next chapter would decide everything. What would happen when those two forces finally collided? The answer was coming, and it wouldn't be easy. Just when I thought the battle couldn't get any more intense, something unexpected happened that changed everything. Late one night, while going through some old documents in the lodge's dusty attic, I stumbled on a set of papers that didn't belong to me, or at least, I thought they didn't. As I flipped through them, I realized these records were tied to a secret agreement from decades ago, something that the HOA never mentioned and probably hoped I'd never find. It was an old land trust contract that granted ownership rights to a small group of private landowners, including me, that effectively superseded the HOA's authority over vast parts of the forest. This discovery didn't just complicate the fight. It turned the whole thing on its head. Suddenly, the HOA's claims looked shaky at best. If this contract was still valid, it could blow the entire eviction attempt out of the water. But more importantly, it raised new questions. Why hadn't the HOA ever disclosed this? Were they trying to hide it to maintain control? And if they had been hiding this all along, what else were they willing to do to keep it quiet? As I started piecing together the puzzle, I noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. The HOA board meetings became more secretive, and some members who used to be friendly suddenly disappeared from the public eye. It was like they were scrambling behind the scenes, trying to figure out their next move before I could use this new evidence against them. The tension wasn't just between me and the HOA anymore. It felt like a deeper, or calculated power struggle was unfolding. With this new twist, the stakes soared higher than ever. I wasn't just fighting to keep my lodge or my forest. I was uncovering a hidden battle over control and ownership that could affect the entire community. The question now was how far the HOA would go to hold on to power and how far I was willing to push back. The showdown was coming, and there was no turning back. With the old land trust contract in hand, I felt a surge of hope, but knew I had to act fast. I reached out to a property lawyer who specialized in land disputes, and together we prepared to confront the HOA head-on. The day of the big meeting arrived, and the tension was almost unbearable. The room was packed with HOA board members, neighbors, and a few supporters who'd stood by me from the start. Everyone was waiting to see how this showdown would unfold. I presented the contract and laid out the facts. Clearly, the forest surrounding my lodge wasn't just mine, it was protected by this decades-old agreement that gave me and a small group of landowners rights that the HOA couldn't override. The faces around the table shifted from confident to stunned. The HOA tried to argue, but their claims suddenly felt hollow in the face of solid legal proof. The lawyer made it clear that any eviction attempt would be not only unjust, but illegal, just when I thought the fight was over. The HOA chairman, looking cornered, dropped a bombshell. He revealed that the HOA had been quietly negotiating to buy out some parts of the forest from other landowners for years, trying to expand their control piece by piece. But the contract I found had blocked those plans without my knowledge. I had been the key obstacle to their entire scheme. The room went silent. The HOA had tried to force me out, not just to enforce rules, but to clear a path for their takeover. That explained the urgency, the pressure, the secrecy. I realized this wasn't just a personal battle. It was a clash between grassroots ownership and corporate-style control. In the end, the HOA had no choice but to back down. I kept my lodge and the forest. But as I looked around, I knew this wasn't the end. The struggle to protect land and rights goes far beyond one cabin. There are bigger forces out there, and sometimes the quietest battles hide the deepest fights. For now, I had one, but the forest still holds many secrets, and this story is far from over.